Kim Yoon-ji sat at the small wooden table in her cramped apartment, surrounded by piles of bills, her gaze lost out the window. The sound of cars from the street below filled the night's silence, and she sighed deeply. Since her father lost his company to bankruptcy, Yoon-ji's life had turned into a never-ending marathon of responsibilities. At 26 years old, she juggled two jobs, working as a small office assistant in the mornings and as a waitress at a neighborhood restaurant in the evenings. What little free time she had left was spent taking care of her mother, who never seemed to recover from the family's downfall. The house they used to live in, once spacious and comfortable, had been sold to pay off debts. Now, Yoon-ji and her mother lived in a small apartment, far from the luxury they once enjoyed. Her days were filled with endless hard work, mounting bills, and relentless pressure. Although she was resilient and determined, a part of Yoon-ji felt the weight of everything piling on her shoulders, especially when it came to her family's expectations. Family pressure was another daily battle. Her mother, once proud and demanding, now channeled her frustrations towards Yoon-ji. "You should be married by now, Yoon-ji. Look at your cousins. All of them are married and living decent lives. And you? Working these dead-end jobs." These words echoed constantly in her head. Her aunts also contributed to her emotional burden, always reminding her how she was falling behind. And now, with her eldest cousin's wedding fast approaching, the situation was about to get even worse. The wedding was only a few days away, and Yoon-ji knew exactly what awaited her. Judgmental looks, snide remarks, and of course, the question she hated most. When will it be your turn? She could already imagine the conversations at the event, her aunts whispering about her failed life and comparing her to her successful cousins. It was a cycle of shame and discomfort that Yoon-ji could no longer endure. That night, as she stared at the bills on the table, she found herself thinking about how nice it would be, just for one weekend, not to be the target of criticism. What if, just for a day, she could have the life everyone expected of her? A successful boyfriend by her side, someone who could silence her aunts and give her mother a little relief. She didn't want to lie anymore, but she couldn't bear the judging stares for one more day. It was then, in a moment of desperate impulse, that she grabbed her phone and started browsing the internet. Her heart raced as she searched for something, anything, that could help her avoid the looming disaster of the wedding. That was when she stumbled upon a peculiar advertisement. Companion service. Rent the perfect boyfriend for a day. Yoon-ji froze. The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time incredibly tempting. A fake boyfriend? Someone to accompany her to the wedding, impress her family, and then disappear without a trace. It was the perfect solution to her problem, a temporary escape from that spiral of humiliation and shame. She hesitated. Would this be ridiculous? What if someone found out? But at the same time, the thought of attending the wedding alone and hearing the same old criticisms was unbearable. Yoon-ji closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm in her mind. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, feeling inferior, feeling like the only one in the family who hadn't made it. Without thinking too much, she clicked on the ad. The website was simple, straight to the point. There were profiles of men available for rent, all with photos and detailed descriptions. Some seemed too young, others too serious, but there was one that caught her eye. Park Min-jae. Tall, attractive, with a confident look. His profile said he was professional, discreet, and perfect for social events. He seemed perfect. Yoon-ji hesitated again. What was she about to do? Hire a stranger to pretend to be her boyfriend? But the idea of impressing her family, silencing the criticism, and for once, feeling like she measured up to their expectations won over her doubts. With trembling hands, she filled out the form and booked Min-jae for the wedding that weekend. After confirming the service, Yoon-ji felt a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, she was preparing for an absurd charade, bringing a man she barely knew to pretend to be her boyfriend. But on the other hand, she felt like for the first time she had some control over the situation. She was about to face her family with confidence, even if that confidence was built on a lie. That night, as she lay in bed, Yoon-ji reflected on the choice she had just made. Would this really help her? Or would it turn out to be an even bigger disaster? She tried to push those thoughts away, but the anxiety wouldn't leave. Her heart raced, and she knew there was no turning back. The contract was set. Deep down, Yoonji just wanted a little peace. She wanted for one weekend the weight of her family's expectations to be lifted from her shoulders. And if everything went well, Park Min-jae would be the key to that. What she didn't know was that her impulsive decision was about to set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. The day of the wedding had arrived, and Kim Yoon-ji was more nervous than she had ever been in her life. She wore an elegant navy blue dress borrowed from a coworker, and as she looked at herself in the mirror, she tried to control the growing anxiety. Her plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. In just a few hours, she would face her family with a complete stranger. Park Min-jae, her rented boyfriend. She glanced at the clock. Only a few minutes remained until the agreed time. Her stomach twisted with every second that passed. What if he wasn't what he appeared to be in the photo? What if he turned out to be a complete disaster in front of her family? But at the same time, she knew that the worst-case scenario was facing the wedding alone, with all those pitiful looks and snide remarks from her aunts. Then the doorbell rang. Yoon-ji walked to the door, taking a deep breath. When she opened it, she was speechless. Park Min-jae was even more impressive in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly styled, casual yet elegant, and his calm, confident smile seemed to melt away some of her anxiety. He looked like the ideal man, the kind of person anyone would want to introduce to their family. "Hello, I'm Park Min-jae. Nice to meet you, Yoon-ji," he said in a smooth, controlled voice, extending his hand to her. His presence was captivating, and for a moment, Yoon-ji forgot how surreal the situation was. She shook his hand, feeling her palms sweat. "Hi, it's nice to meet you," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Min-jae studied her for a moment, noticing her nervousness. With a gentle smile, he said, "Relax, I'm here to do what you asked." His look seemed to overflow with mystery. Little did Yoon-ji know that the man before her was not just anyone. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in Korea, but he had stepped into this temporary job as part of a bet with his friends, intrigued by the challenge of living as a normal person. During the short taxi ride to the wedding venue, Yoon-ji and Min-jae exchanged some hesitant conversation. She briefly explained her family situation, how they were an extremely critical bunch, constantly comparing her to her cousins and questioning her life choices. Min-jae listened attentively, showing genuine interest in every word. He didn't say much about himself, keeping his personal life carefully guarded, and kept the focus on calming her down. The conversation flowed more naturally than Yoon-ji expected. Although she was paying for his services, Min-jae's presence was strangely comforting. He had an aura of safety about him, as if he knew exactly how to handle any situation. What Yoon-ji didn't realize was that his confidence came from years of experience at the helm of one of Korea's largest companies. As a CEO, Min-jae was accustomed to high-pressure situations and always knew how to maintain control, even in uncomfortable scenarios. While Min-jae listened to Yoon-ji, he also observed her. She was very different from the people he usually dealt with in his social circle. Yoon-ji was genuine. Her worries were real, and she didn't hide her emotions. There was something refreshing about her honesty, something he didn't encounter in the superficial world of business. That intrigued him. Finally, they arrived at the wedding hall. The celebration was already in full swing, and as they walked in together, all eyes turned to them. Yoon-ji felt a shiver run down her spine, the nerves returning in full force. Her mother and aunts were sitting at a table in the middle of the room, surrounded by other family members. She knew that the judgments would start the moment she stepped into that space. "It's okay. We're in this together," Min-jae said softly, offering her his arm. Yoon-ji, still tense, accepted the gesture. Taking a deep breath, they walked into the room, making their way through the guests until they reached the table where her family sat. Her mother was the first to notice Min-jae's presence, and her eyes widened. Who is this?" she asked, clearly surprised, as her aunts immediately stopped their conversations to listen. Yoonji swallowed nervously, but before she could answer, Min-jae smoothly took the lead. "Hello, I'm Park Min-jae, Yoonji's boyfriend. It's a pleasure to meet you," he said with a flawless smile, bowing slightly to greet everyone. His words flowed so naturally that even Yoonji was surprised. He wasn't just playing a role. He seemed genuinely comfortable in the situation. The reactions were immediate. Her aunts, who had been ready to make sarcastic comments, were left speechless. The shock of seeing Yoonji with such an impressive and handsome man was evident. Their expressions of disdain turned into curiosity. "Oh, the pleasure is ours. You seem like a very polite young man," one of her aunts stammered, still visibly surprised. Her mother, who moments earlier had been ready to ask yet again about her love life, remained silent for a few seconds, processing the situation. However, the new expression of relief and pride on her mother's face was unmistakable. As the hours passed, Yoonji's plan seemed to be working perfectly. Min-jae handled everything with mastery, engaging in pleasant conversations with relatives, complimenting the atmosphere, and making everyone laugh with his charming storytelling. He even won over the toughest family members, who couldn't stop praising him. Yoonji, on the other hand, could hardly believe what was happening. Sitting beside Min-jae, she watched him with growing admiration. He was calm, charismatic, and seemed to know exactly what to say to impress her family. For the first time in years, she felt relieved at a family event. No one looked at her with pity or talked about her life as if it were a failure. Instead, the conversations revolved around how she had finally found a good man. But as the wedding progressed, something inside Yoonji began to shift. Even though she knew it was all a lie, she couldn't help but think that for a moment she wished it were true. The way Min-jae treated her, the gentle way he looked at her, the confidence he radiated, began to stir feelings inside her. She tried to push those thoughts away, reminding herself that he was just a paid companion. But the line between the lie and reality was starting to blur. On the other side, Park Min-jae was also dealing with his own internal dilemmas. When he had accepted the bet from his friends to live as a common person, he never imagined he would become so captivated by someone like Yoonji. She was different from the women he usually encountered. More real, more human. Park Min-jae's world was full of superficiality and people who only cared about his wealth. Yoonji, with her honesty and strength, was a breath of fresh air in his life. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, but at the same time, he couldn't help the growing interest he felt for her. As the night at the wedding came to an end, Yoonji looked at Min-jae with a hesitant smile. "Thank you. You were amazing today," she said. Min-jae smiled back, leaning in slightly. "The night isn't over yet, Yoonji." Unbeknownst to them, they were on the verge of a much deeper emotional journey than either of them had anticipated. As the wedding continued, Kim Yoonji couldn't shake the mix of relief and disbelief she felt. Everything was going far better than she had ever imagined. Park Min-jae played the role of her boyfriend with almost surreal perfection. He laughed politely at her uncle's jokes, engaged in conversations with her aunts about business as if he were part of the family. And most importantly, he made her feel safe. For the first time in years, Yoonji didn't feel like a disappointment in front of her family. While dinner progressed, Yoonji found herself watching Min-jae more closely. He wasn't just an excellent actor. He seemed genuinely interested in everything around him. He asked sincere questions about her family and demonstrated an impressive ability to adapt, no matter how awkward the situation. More than a facade, Min-jae seemed to be exactly what he appeared. Calm, charming, and in a way, very natural. At one point, one of her aunts began to ask about their future together. "So, when are you two going to make it official? When's your wedding going to be?" And Yoonji felt her stomach churn. The lie was getting too big. She was already worrying about how far she would have to take this story, but before she could answer, Min-jae stepped in. "Oh, about that. We're taking things slow," he said with an elegant smile, keeping one arm casually around Yoonji's shoulders. "We want to enjoy the moment, no need to rush. But who knows in the future? I can say I'm very happy with Yoonji, and I can confidently say she's a very special woman. He looked at Yoonji with such warmth and sincerity that, for a moment, she almost believed it was true. Yoonji's heart skipped a beat. There was no way he could be this convincing. Or could it be that he was actually feeling something too? She quickly pushed those thoughts aside, reminding herself that she was paying for this. What he was doing was just part of the service. Even so, something inside her couldn't ignore the feelings that were beginning to surface. There was something about Park Min-jae that disarmed her. The way he treated her, the confident way he spoke, and how he seemed to understand her emotions without her saying a word was slowly stirring something in her heart. During the break between the ceremony and the reception, Yoonji and Min-jae had a moment alone in the softly lit garden of the venue. The environment was peaceful, the cool night air making the lights seem warmer, and Yoonji finally allowed herself to relax a little. "You really know what you're doing, don't you?" she said with a mix of relief and playful sarcasm, trying to break the tense atmosphere. Min-jae smiled back, leaning against the garden's railing. "I try," he answered modestly, but with that irresistible touch of confidence. "But you're doing great too. Your family seems to believe we're a real couple. Did you know you had that talent?" He looked at her with a curious expression, as if he was trying to figure out something beyond the obvious. Yoonji laughed nervously, but the comment made her a bit uncomfortable. "I never wanted to be good at this. Honestly, I just want this night to end without any issues. I'm tired of having to pretend to be someone I'm not." The frankness in her words reflected the emotional weight she had been carrying. She was exhausted from trying to live up to her family's expectations, and although this charade was successful, it also emotionally drained her. Min-jae noticed the sincerity in her words, and for a moment, his expression softened. He stepped closer to her, looking at her with unexpected seriousness. "I understand how you feel. You're doing this because of your family's pressure, but the truth is you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Yoonji." His tone was low and grave, and suddenly the tension between them seemed different. No longer about the lie, but about something deeper. Yoonji felt a lump form in her throat, but forced herself to smile. "I know that. It's just that sometimes it seems easier to pretend than to face reality." Min-jae looked at her for a moment without saying anything, but his eyes said more than any words could. There was a silent understanding between them. Their brief conversation alone was interrupted by the arrival of her eldest cousin, the bride, who came to thank Yoonji for attending. "Yoonji, I can't believe you're here with this amazing guy. Where were you hiding him?" The bride, obviously emotional and excited about her own big day, continued to shower Min-jae with compliments, while Yoonji felt her face heat up. She didn't know how to respond. Everything still felt surreal. Min-jae, always polite and charming, greeted the bride with the same perfection he had shown to the rest of the family. Yoonji watched from a distance, half in disbelief. As he spoke and acted with all the class he possessed, she couldn't shake the feeling that Min-jae didn't seem like a simple companion. His posture, the way he handled situations, everything about him seemed too refined. It was as if he were accustomed to attending these kinds of events. Not as a guest, but as someone who belonged in a much more sophisticated world. As the night wore on, Yoonji grew more and more confused about her own feelings. The longer she spent with Min-jae, the harder it was to remember that everything was just a job for him. The way he looked at her, the way he made sure she was comfortable, went beyond what she expected from a paid service. Could it be that he was starting to feel something too? Or was it all part of the game? On the other hand, Park Min-jae struggled with his own thoughts. Since the beginning of the night, he couldn't stop thinking about Yoonji. She was different from any woman he had ever met. She wasn't dazzled by his appearance or concerned about status, as the women in his social circle were. Yoonji was genuine, with all her insecurities and frustrations, but also incredibly strong and determined. He was intrigued by her, more than he should be. The bet he had made with his friends now seemed meaningless. Accepting the challenge to live as an ordinary person for a month had been an attempt to escape the stifling world of business. But now he found himself in an emotional dilemma he hadn't anticipated. The truth was, Min-jae was starting to develop real feelings for Yoon-ji, and the facade of being a rented boyfriend was beginning to weigh on him. The night at the wedding ended smoothly. When the guests began to say their goodbyes, Yoon-ji and Min-jae also prepared to leave. On the way back, they were silent, both lost in their thoughts. Yoon-ji felt a mix of relief and sadness. The plan had worked, but now that the night was over, what would come next? She still had to face the reality that Min-jae wasn't part of her life for real. When they arrived in front of Yoon-ji's apartment, Min-jae walked her to the door. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with something more than just a simple farewell. "Thank you again," Yoon-ji said, trying to hide the turmoil of emotions she felt. Min-jae smiled, but there was something different in his eyes, something more intense. "It was my pleasure, Yoon-ji. I really enjoyed spending the evening with you," he said, his voice softer and filled with meaning. Before she could respond, he leaned in and gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead. It was a delicate gesture, but one that carried an emotion Yoon-ji couldn't ignore. As Min-jae walked away, Yoon-ji stood frozen, watching him disappear down the hallway. Her heart was racing, and she knew this wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. Something had changed that night. The performance was turning into something real, and both she and Min-jae knew that the road ahead would be far more complicated than they had anticipated. After the wedding, Kim Yoon-ji tried to go back to her normal life. Or at least, she tried. The following days seemed to flow in the same routine as always. Waking up early, dealing with traffic, working long hours, and coming home exhausted. However, something inside her had changed. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Park Min-jae, the man who, for one night, had made her life much easier. The sense of safety and comfort he had provided during the wedding lingered in her mind, as if something had been left unresolved. She tried, unsuccessfully, to push these thoughts away. After all, Min-jae wasn't really her boyfriend. He had been hired, paid to play that role, and the night had been nothing but an act. Yoon-ji knew this, so why did her heart insist on feeling otherwise? Why did the memory of his look, so intense, so real, still haunt her? The gentle kiss on her forehead, the way he had taken care of her. Everything seemed to have gone beyond the duties of a companion for hire. Meanwhile, Park Min-jae was facing an increasingly unbearable dilemma. He knew he needed to tell Yoon-ji the truth, but the fear of how she would react paralyzed him. He wasn't just a companion who had played his role in her wedding. He was a billionaire, the CEO of a powerful conglomerate. And the only reason he had entered that world of rented boyfriends was due to a foolish bet with friends, something he deeply regretted now. The problem was that with each passing day, he found himself more entangled in a web of lies he had spun himself. One morning, Yoon-ji was leaving her job at the small office where she worked as an administrative assistant. She was exhausted as usual and just wanted to go home, take a hot bath, and forget about the day's troubles. As she walked distractedly through the busy streets of Seoul, her attention was caught by a large advertising screen in the city center, displaying the latest news. She stopped, unable to believe her eyes. There, on the giant screen, was Park Min-jae. But he wasn't just the man she had hired as a companion. In fact, he was the CEO of MJ Group, one of the biggest companies in the country. Shock coursed through her body like an electric current. The footage showed Min-jae at a corporate event, surrounded by executives and journalists. He looked exactly as she remembered. Confident, elegant, powerful. But now he was someone completely different from the man she had known. Yoon-ji felt the ground open beneath her feet. Everything she thought was true turned out to be a lie in a matter of seconds. The man she had hired, the one who pretended to be her boyfriend at the wedding, wasn't just a simple companion. He was a billionaire. She stood frozen, staring at the screen, her heart racing, and a whirlwind of emotions began to build inside her. Confusion, anger, shame. How could he have hidden something so huge from her? Everything they had experienced together was a much bigger lie than she had ever imagined. Her mind began racing. Why? Why would he have accepted pretending to be a companion? What was he doing in the world of rented boyfriends if he was so powerful and influential? And more importantly, what did that mean for everything that had happened between them? She felt used, manipulated, as if she had been a pawn in some game she didn't even know she was playing. Desperate for answers, Yoonji went straight home and searched for more information about Min Jae online. The news confirmed everything. He was the heir to the MJ Group, a billion-dollar company with global influence. Articles talked about his success, his leadership, and of course, his private personal life. But none of it explained why he had agreed to play someone else in her life. The feeling of betrayal grew inside her like a storm. The memories of the moments they had shared at the wedding, the kind words, the sincere looks, all of it now seemed like a big lie. She had trusted him, even if it was just for one night, and he had deceived her. Yoonji felt humiliated, as if she had been made a fool of in front of everyone. And the worst part was that she had started to develop feelings for him. She could no longer bear the whirlwind of emotions without confronting him. In a fit of impulse, Yoonji decided to call him. She still had Min Jae's number from when they had arranged the deal for the wedding. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. Anger and pain mixed together, and she knew she needed answers. She needed to understand what had happened and why he had lied so blatantly. On the other side, Park Min-jae was in the middle of an important meeting at his office when his phone vibrated. Seeing Yoonji's name on the screen, his heart raced. He knew this moment would come, but that didn't lessen the fear he felt as he prepared to face the truth. He excused himself from the meeting and answered the call, his voice tense. "Yoonji," he began, but she immediately cut him off. "Min-jae, you lied to me. Everything was a lie, wasn't it?" Her voice was filled with pain and indignation. She didn't give him any room to explain. "I saw the news. You're not a simple companion, you're the CEO of MJ Group. How could you deceive me like that? What were you doing in my life? Playing with me?" Min-jae took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment before answering. "Yoonji, I wanted to tell you the truth, but things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" Yoonji shot back. "Are you kidding me? You had control from the beginning to the end. I was an idiot, wasn't I? Trusting you, thinking that for a moment it was real. I thought you cared, but it was all just a big lie." Yoonji's words cut Min-jae deeply. He knew she had every right to be hurt, and regret consumed him. "I do care about you, Yoonji. I know it seems like a lie now, but my feelings for you are real. I got involved in this situation in a way I never expected. At first it was a stupid bet, but after I met you, everything changed." "A bet?" Yoonji repeated, incredulous. "You bet on my life? Is that why you got involved in this? To have fun at my expense?" "No, that's not it." Min-jae tried to explain, his voice desperate. "In the beginning, yes, it was a bet. I was tired of my life and wanted something different. But after I met you, everything changed. You were the only real thing that happened to me in a long time. I didn't want to lie to you, but by the time I realized, I was already trapped in this lie. I was afraid of losing you if I told the truth." "And you think you won't lose me now?" Yoonji asked, her voice filled with pain. "You used me. I felt safe with you. I thought I could trust you. But now I see I was wrong. You're not who I thought you were." Min-jae fell silent. He knew there was nothing more he could say at that moment to fix the damage he had caused. The truth was out, and the betrayal was too deep. "Yoonji, please," he began, but before he could continue, she interrupted him. "Don't contact me again, Min-jae. I'm not a game, and I won't be part of your life of lies." With those words, Yoonji hung up, leaving Min-jae alone in his office, feeling the unbearable weight of his wrong choices. He had lost the one thing that mattered most, and he didn't know if he could ever fix it. Yoonji, on the other hand, collapsed onto her couch. Silent tears streamed down her face. The pain of betrayal was immense, and all she wanted at that moment was to erase Min-jae from her life forever. She couldn't believe that someone like him, who had seemed so genuine, could have played with her emotions like that. All she wanted was to forget. But deep down, she knew that forgetting Min-jae wouldn't be that simple. The days after the separation were slow and dark for Kim Yoon-ji. She threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from the emptiness that seemed to have taken over her life. Still, it was impossible to ignore the feeling of betrayal and the pain that Min-jae had left behind. His smile, the way he made her feel safe, all the words he had said, now felt cold and calculated. She felt used, like all the affection he had shown her had been part of a cruel game. The hurt weighed like an anchor on Yoonji's heart. Yet, even in the midst of her anger, sadness, and the sense of being deceived, she couldn't forget him completely. Something lingered, something she couldn't deny. Despite everything, Min-jae had made her feel special, loved, and no matter how hard she tried, those memories persisted. As the weeks went by, and despite her efforts to move on, Yoonji knew that something still felt unresolved inside her. Meanwhile, Park Min-jae was experiencing the same torment. The life he had carefully built, a life of control and success, seemed to be crumbling before him. His work, which had once occupied all his time and focus, now felt like a pointless distraction. Losing Yoonji consumed him, and he kept asking himself over and over how he had let things reach this point. He loved her. There was no doubt about it anymore. The feelings he had developed for her weren't something he could simply ignore or erase. But the lie, the secret he had hidden, had destroyed everything. With each passing day, Min-jae wondered how he could win Yoonji back. He knew it would be difficult, if not impossible, but giving up on her wasn't an option. He tried sending messages, tried calling, but Yoonji didn't respond. Her silence was a painful punishment that cut deep. Nevertheless, he was determined. Min-jae knew that the only way to fix things was to show her how much he was willing to fight for this love. 1 month after that fateful phone call, Min-jae made a decision. He needed to see her, to talk to her face to face, not just to apologize, but to show her that what he felt was real, that he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back her trust. With his heart in his hands, he planned his next move. It wouldn't be a grand, exaggerated gesture or something overly dramatic. He knew that Yoonji wasn't the type to be impressed by extravagant displays of affection. What he needed was to be sincere, honest, and above all, vulnerable. At the same time, Yoonji was leaving work on a chilly afternoon, lost in her thoughts, when she noticed something unusual. Near the entrance to her office, a small group of people were holding up simple but impactful signs. As she approached, she saw what was written. "I'm sorry, Yoonji. Please give me a chance to explain. Min-jae." Her heart skipped a beat. She looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Who were these people? Why were they there? And then, in the midst of the crowd, she saw him. Park Min-jae, dressed casually, without the imposing posture of a CEO. Just a regular man, his eyes filled with regret. He stood there, holding a modest bouquet of flowers, but with a gaze that carried the weight of everything they had been through. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Yoonji froze, not knowing what to think or say. The last thing she had expected was to see him standing there, so exposed, so vulnerable. The people around them began to step back, giving them space, and Min-jae took a few steps toward her. "Yoonji," he began, his voice soft but full of emotion. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything from you, but I need you to listen to me. Just for a moment." The silence between them was palpable. Yoonji, still stunned, crossed her arms, trying to appear distant, but she couldn't hide the pain in her eyes. "You don't need to do this," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "It's over. You've already done what you needed to do." But Min-jae shook his head, desperate to explain. "No, Yoonji, you don't understand. I made a lot of mistakes, and I know I hurt you deeply. But what I feel for you is real. It wasn't a lie. Nothing that happened between us was fake for me." Yoonji looked at him with disbelief. "How can I believe you after all this? You lied about who you were, made me believe in something that didn't exist. And now you expect me to believe that suddenly everything is real?" Min-jae took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. I know it seems impossible, but from the moment I met you, something changed in me. At first, I was running away from my own life. I was tired of being who I am, of living in a world where everything revolves around money and power. The bet I made with my friends was stupid. I know that. But meeting you was the best mistake I ever made. You made me see the world differently, and more importantly, you made me see who I really am when I'm with you. His words began to penetrate the barrier that Yoonji had built around herself. She wanted to believe, wanted to allow herself to feel again what she had felt with him, but the fear was still there. You made me feel like I was just part of your game, Min-jae. How can I forget that? Min-jae stepped even closer, gripping the bouquet tighter. I know I can't erase what happened, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that my feelings for you are real. I'm not a perfect man, and I've made many mistakes. But what I feel for you is the only true thing that has ever happened in my life. I'm here, with my heart open, asking for a second chance. Not to fix the past, but to try and build a future with you, without lies, without secrets. Yoonji felt tears welling up in her eyes, and her racing heart began to calm with each of Min-jae's sincere words. She knew he was being honest now. He seemed different, more vulnerable, more human. Her defenses started to crumble, bit by bit, and she finally sighed, allowing the emotions she had held back to come through. I don't know if I can forget what happened, she said, her voice trembling. But I know that forgetting you will be even harder. Min-jae gave a small smile, full of hope. I'm not asking you to forget, Yoonji. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. There was a moment of silence, a moment where the world seemed to stand still around them. And then finally, Yoonji took a step forward and, with a hesitant look, accepted the flowers he offered. Her touch was soft, almost timid, but enough for Min-jae to know that she was willing to try. She looked at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty, but also with a quiet hope. All right, she said softly. One chance. But don't hurt me again, Min-jae. He nodded, the relief clear in his eyes. I won't. Never again. With that, the distance between them finally dissolved. In a gesture full of tenderness, Min-jae pulled Yoonji into a tight embrace. She rested her head on his chest, feeling his warmth, and realized that no matter how difficult it was, she was willing to forgive. There was a chance to start over, to build something new, this time based on truth. And so, in that moment, they left behind the lies and misunderstandings that had separated them. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but the love they felt, the love that had started with a lie but grew in truth, would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Min-jae had finally found something that money couldn't buy. The chance to love and be loved for who he truly was. The days after the separation were gloomy for Kim Yoonji. She immersed herself in work, trying to distract herself from the emptiness that seemed to have taken over her life. Still, it was impossible to ignore the feeling of betrayal and the pain that Park Min-jae had left behind. His smile, the way he made her feel safe, all the words he had said, now felt cold and calculated. She felt used, as if all the affection he had shown her had been part of a cruel game. The hurt weighed on her heart like a heavy burden. However, even in the midst of anger, sadness, and the sense of being deceived, she couldn't completely forget him. There was something more, something she couldn't deny. Despite everything, Min-jae had made her feel special, loved, and no matter how hard she tried, those memories stayed with her. The weeks passed, and though she tried to move on, Yoonji knew that something still felt unresolved inside her. Meanwhile, Park Min-jae was going through the same torment. The life he had so carefully constructed, one of control and success, now seemed to be crumbling before him. His work, once the center of his focus and time, now felt like an empty distraction. The loss of Yoonji consumed him, and he found himself repeatedly asking how he had let things spiral out of control. He loved her. There was no doubt in his mind now. The feelings that had blossomed for her were not something he could just ignore or erase. But the lie, the secret he had kept, had shattered everything. As each day passed, Min-jae wondered how he could possibly win Yoonji back. He knew it would be difficult, perhaps impossible, but giving up on her wasn't an option. He tried sending messages, tried calling her, but Yoonji remained silent. Her silence was a punishment that cut him deeply. However, he was determined. Min-jae knew that the only way to fix things was to show her how much he was willing to fight for this love. 1 month after the fateful phone call, Min-jae made a decision. He needed to see her, to talk to her face to face, not just to apologize, but to show her that his feelings were real and that he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back her trust. With his heart in his hands, he came up with a plan. It wouldn't be a grand, exaggerated gesture or something overly dramatic. He knew Yoonji wasn't the kind of person who would be impressed by extravagant displays of affection. What he needed was sincerity, honesty, and, above all, vulnerability. Meanwhile, Yoonji was leaving work on a chilly afternoon, distracted, when she noticed something unusual. Near the entrance of her office, a small group of people were holding up simple yet impactful signs. As she got closer, she read what was written. "I'm sorry, Yoonji. Please give me a chance to explain. Min-jae." Her heart raced. She looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Who were these people? Why were they here? And then, in the midst of the crowd, she saw him. Park Min-jae, dressed casually, without the imposing aura of a CEO. Just an ordinary man with regret in his eyes. He stood there, holding a simple bouquet of flowers, his expression full of the weight of everything they had been through. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Yoonji froze, unsure of what to think or say. The last thing she expected was to see him standing there, so exposed, so vulnerable. The people around them began to step back, giving them space, and Min-jae took a few steps toward her. "Yoonji," he began, his voice gentle but full of emotion. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I need you to listen to me, just for a moment." The silence between them was thick. Yoonji, still stunned, crossed her arms, trying to appear distant, but she couldn't hide the pain in her eyes. "You don't need to do this," she responded, trying to keep her composure. "It's over. You've already done what you needed to do." But Min-jae shook his head, desperate to explain. "No, Yoonji, you don't understand. I made so many mistakes, and I know I hurt you deeply. But what I feel for you is real. It wasn't a lie. Nothing that happened between us was fake for me." Yoonji looked at him with disbelief. "How can I believe you after all this? You lied about who you were, made me believe in something that wasn't real. And now you expect me to believe that suddenly everything is true?" Min-jae took a deep breath, his voice faltering slightly. "I know it seems impossible, but from the moment I met you, something changed in me. At first, I was trying to escape my own life. I was tired of being who I am, tired of living in a world where everything is about money and power. The bet I made with my friends was stupid, I know that. But meeting you was the best mistake I ever made. You made me see the world in a different way. And more importantly, you made me see who I really am when I'm with you." His words began to pierce through the wall Yoonji had built around herself. She wanted to believe him, wanted to allow herself to feel again what she had felt with him, but fear still lingered. "You made me feel like I was just part of your game, Min-jae. How can I forget that?" Min-jae stepped closer, holding the bouquet more tightly. "I know I can't erase what happened, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that my feelings are real. I'm not perfect, and I've made many mistakes. But what I feel for you, it's the only real thing that's ever happened to me. I'm here, with my heart open, asking for a second chance. Not to fix the past, but to try and build a future with you, without lies, without secrets." Tears welled up in Yoonji's eyes, and her racing heart began to calm with each of Min-jae's sincere words. She knew he was being honest now. He seemed different, more vulnerable, more human. Her defenses began to crumble, little by little, and she finally let out a sigh, allowing the emotions she had been holding back to surface. I don't know if I can forget what happened, she said, her voice trembling. But I know that forgetting you will be even harder. Minjae gave a small, hopeful smile. I'm not asking you to forget, Yoonji. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. There was a moment of silence, a moment where the world seemed to stand still around them. Then, finally, Yoonji took a step forward, and with a hesitant look, she accepted the flowers he offered. Her touch was soft, almost timid, but enough for Minjae to know that she was willing to try. She looked at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty, but also with a quiet hope. All right, she said softly. One chance. But don't hurt me again, Minjae. He nodded, the relief clear in his eyes. I won't. Never again. With that, the distance between them finally disappeared. In a gesture full of tenderness, Minjae pulled Yoonji into a tight embrace. She rested her head on his chest, feeling his warmth, and realized that, as difficult as it might be, she was willing to forgive. There was a chance for a fresh start, to build something new, this time based on truth. And so, in that moment, they left behind the lies and misunderstandings that had kept them apart. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but the love they shared, the love that had started with a lie but had grown into something real, would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Minjae had finally found something that money couldn't buy, the chance to love and be loved for who he truly was. If you enjoyed this heartwarming love story full of twists and emotions, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment below. We'd love to know what you thought of Yoonji and Minjae's journey. And hey, don't stop here. We have more amazing dramas for you to dive into, so make sure to subscribe and explore other captivating stories right here on our channel. Turn on the notifications so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next drama.